Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The big story today was the almost 3-hour-long all-party meeting to try and work out a consensus on how to handle the 61-day-old crisis in Kashmir. The meeting discussed confidence-building measures as well as a dialogue with all stakeholders. In part 2 of tonight's show, I shall talk to 2 informed observers from Srinagar about how the Kashmiri people are likely to respond to today's developments. But first, I'm joined by the former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir and the working president of the National Conference Party, Omar Abdullah. Omar Abdullah, let me start by asking you for your overall broad impression of the outcome of today's all-party meeting as well as the earlier delegation visit to Kashmir. Have they achieved anything? Have they made a meaningful contribution to the process of resolution of the problem?
Unfortunately not, Karan. Both the all-party delegation and for that I can't blame the delegation. The blame for this must lie with the state government. I don't believe enough preparation went into organizing proper meetings for this all-party delegation, and therefore I don't believe they met as wide a cross-section of people as a similar all-party delegation had met when they came in 2010. So that is of course one part of it. The second part of it is the statement that emerged out of the all-party meeting today. There was no substance to it. I saw very little, if any, difference between what the Prime Minister had said after he met the group of opposition parties from the state a few weeks ago and the statement that has come out from the all-party delegation. It talks about the same things, but there's no substance to that statement. There are no concrete ideas. There's no way forward. It's just a general appeal that has gone out to people. Now, if they had to make an appeal, they could quite easily have done it from Delhi without having bothered to visit Jammu and Kashmir and spend the day and a half that they spent in the state.
So you're saying that no advance has happened today beyond making yet another general appeal? No advance has happened whatsoever?
None whatsoever, and I'm sure the people who you speak to in part 2 of your program will tell you that their statement has been widely discounted or ignored on the ground in the valley, because, as I said, there's no substance in it. I mean, there's nothing in that statement that would suggest that the all-party meeting has worked out a way forward to pull the state and particularly the valley out of the mess that it finds itself in now. There are no concrete ideas. There are no concrete steps. It's all generalities.
One more general question before I come to details. Does this therefore mean that you are disappointed, or did you have no expectations?
Well, I'd made it very clear to the all-party delegation when we met them on Sunday that there wasn't much in the shape of expectations. But I had hoped that given the complete absence of credibility of the process, that they would pull something out of their hat, realizing that they had an uphill task ahead of them. Because of the failure of the previous all-party delegation to see through its recommendations to a logical conclusion. Please don't forget, it is a similar all-party delegation that gave rise to the interlocutors after 2010. But that all-party delegation washed its hands of the process after those interlocutors were appointed, as a result of which this group enjoyed very little credibility when they arrived here. I had sort of made this point known to them, but as I said, the statement is disappointing because there are no specifics in it. There's nothing that we can latch on to and suggest that, yes, this is a way forward for us.
You're right when you say this statement is non-specific, it has no details, it doesn't offer anything in concrete terms. However, it is known that the actual discussions did involve, to begin with, several proposals to restore calm and to end the protest. I'd like you to take you through a few of those proposals to find out A, what you think of them, and B, how important they are. First, many parties wanted the pellet gun not to be used. All that the government has done is to announce a day or two earlier that the pellet gun will only be used in the rarest of rare occasions, and for the rest of the time the security forces will rely on Pava shells. Do you think the step the government took a day or two earlier is adequate and sufficient, or do you think it's inadequate and the pellet gun needs to be stopped altogether?
Completely inadequate. Again, I made this point to the all-party delegation when we met them, that who is to determine the rarest of the rare cases? This is not a law and order disturbance type situation where you're sending magistrates out with every column of security forces. And therefore, who is to give instructions as to the usage of these pellet guns? Who determines what is the rarest of the rare circumstance? Since this order of usage under rarest of the rare circumstances was given, these pellet guns have actually resulted in more deaths and more injuries. So it's not like the guns aren't being used. We've had, as far as I know, at least one death and a number of serious injuries as a result of these pellet guns after this rarest of the rare case order was issued. So, I mean, in letter it may be fine, but in spirit it's not being implemented.
Now, the left parties in particular asked for the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to be lifted from urban centres and particularly from parts of Srinagar. The BJP, on the other hand, is reluctant to do so, and some of its spokespersons have actually said that with militancy and infiltration rising, this is not possible. Now, I know that when you were Chief Minister, you were very keen that AFSPA should be lifted from places like Srinagar and Gandarbal. Do you believe that a partial lifting of ASPA in the present circumstances is a necessary confidence building measure, or because the situation is disturbed, do you think it would be a risk? Which of the two?
Well, I believe it's a necessary confidence building measure, but I believe we've also lost the occasion that was available to us. When I had advocated the removal or at least the partial lifting of AFSPA from areas, the situation was a lot calmer than it is today. Militancy was a lot lower, and we had actually cleared wide areas of Srinagar and its surrounding areas from militancy. As a result of this 60-day agitation, it is no secret that militants have moved into areas hitherto cleared, and in fact, it's again, I mean, not really a secret that we've spotted militants in the heart of Srinagar city as recent as a couple of days ago. So I don't know, as much as I would like the lifting of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to begin as a confidence building measure, I don't know if the current government in the centre and the state have actually allowed for a situation as such to be created. I have a feeling that under their control it's actually slipped backwards, and this may be a step that they won't be able to take.
I'm just repeating that last part, that lifting of ASPA even from selective places at this moment in these circumstances, for the reasons you mentioned, may not be practicable and possible because militants have been spotted in parts of Srinagar, the capital itself.
Well, anything is possible. The point I'm trying to make is that when I advocated the lifting of AFSPA from these areas, the situation was a lot better than it is today. So while I continue to remain an advocate for the lifting of AFSPA, unfortunately, instead of improving the situation further, this government has allowed it to deteriorate. So whether they're in a position to take this decision or not, I can't say, because I'm not privy to the intelligence reports that I was privy to during my term in office.
Now, the left parties have also asked for compensation and care for all of those who've been injured. In the present circumstances, when perhaps something over 7,000 civilians have been injured and maybe 200 to 300 have actually suffered pellet injuries in their eyes, how important a confidence building measure would that be as far as the people are concerned?
See, I'm actually disappointed that this didn't find measure in the actual statement that came out. What stops us reaching out as a humanitarian gesture and saying that we will put into place a rehabilitation mechanism for all those who have been handicapped by the use of pellet guns, particularly those who have lost their eyesight or have partial loss of eyesight? Please understand, these people are going to be suffering for the rest of their lives. We are going to have to rebuild their lives somehow, and that's not going to be an easy process. I think the government owes it to these people to put into place a rehabilitation mechanism for all those people who have suffered grievous injuries on account of the use of pellet guns. A wider reach out can obviously be made for those who have been injured in the course of this agitation, but a long-term rehabilitation program for those who have suffered grievous injuries particularly loss or partial loss of eyesight on account of the pellet guns, I think is the need of the hour. And the fact that this didn't figure in the statement is very disappointing.
Now, the left have also called for a judicial inquiry into the alleged excesses by the security forces. As a former chief minister who's headed the unified command, do you endorse that demand, or do you think this is the wrong moment to implement it because it could have an adverse impact on the morale of the security forces?
No, I mean, there is no harm in accountability. The state government and the central government from time to time have said that where there has been excessive use of force, there will be accountability and those responsible will be punished. Therefore, a mechanism to work out who is responsible for excessive use of force is required. Now, whether you wait for this agitation to finish and then announce it, or you announce it mid-agitation, that is for you. But whatever mechanism you adopt, it will have to be a time-bound inquiry. It can't be open-ended.
Now, the all-party meeting also issued a statement which calls for dialogue with all stakeholders. However, the statement doesn't refer to the Hurriyat specifically by name. The left have made it clear that the term stakeholder clearly involves the Hurriyat. The BJP is fudging, and Minister State Jitendra Singh, when asked what does the term stakeholder mean, actually said it means what it means and stopped there. So let me ask you a direct question to begin with. Do you believe the term stakeholder is sufficient, or in the present circumstances should the Hurriyat have been named in that statement specifically?
Well, as long as in implementation you widen the scope of stakeholders to actually mean stakeholders, then I have no problem with the use of the term. But if you're going to use it, as you said, to fudge and to narrow the terms of reference, then obviously it's a problem. But then once you start naming individual groups, where does it stop? A party like mine will turn around and say, then why don't you name us? Why just the Hurriyat conference? Does that mean we are irrelevant to the process? So as long as when you say stakeholders, you mean all stakeholders, cutting across party affiliations and ideological affiliations, I have no problem with it.
In other words,
so far, we've seen very little
carry on, please finish.
Very little commitment to such a dialogue.
What you're saying, Omar Abdullah, if I understand you correctly, is that it's the intent of the government that counts, not the specific language they use. And if their intent is to involve the Hurriyat, then the term stakeholder is sufficient. But if their intent is to fudge and not involve the Hurriyat, then the term stakeholder is misleading and won't help.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you're just going to talk about development and you're going to talk about job creation, then yes, it is, not only is it insufficient, it's also misleading. But if you're actually committed to opening up a political dialogue to resolve the political issue of Jammu and Kashmir, and you are willing to take on board all those stakeholders who have been made part of the dialogue process in the past, then there is no problem with that.
Now, Sitaram,
the thing we need to see is what mechanism will you adopt for that dialogue? Who is going to talk to these stakeholders?
I'll come to that mechanism, because Sitaram Yechury has said that if meaningful talks with Hurriyat are to happen, then Hurriyat must be formally invited by the central government, just like anyone else will be invited. And secondly, they mustn't be invited, as happened last time, by Mehbooba Mufti, writing in her capacity as PDP chairperson rather than Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. But there is an opposite view that was given to me a couple of days ago by Muzaffar Hussain Beg. He said, the reason why Mehbooba Mufti wrote in her capacity as PDP chairperson and not as chief minister is because the Hurriyat don't recognize her government and don't recognize her as chief minister. Had she therefore written as head of a government, they'd have been required to refuse. But by writing as PDP chairperson, she was trying to make it easier for them to accept. Where do you stand on that issue? Do you accept Muzaffar Hussain Beg's explanation? And secondly, should the invite go formally to the Hurriyat from the central government as it will to everyone else?
Look, if the Hurriyat doesn't recognize Mehbooba Mufti's government, then what was the need for the chief spokesperson of the PDP to appeal to Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani on behalf of Mehbooba Mufti, saying she is like your daughter, give her another chance? I mean, the PDP ties itself up in knots. If the Hurriyat doesn't recognize her government, then why appeal to the Hurriyat for another chance for Mehbooba Mufti to govern this state? Obviously, this mechanism was adopted to give deniability both to the BJP as well as to the central government. Otherwise, if it was a serious invitation, it would have gone from Mehbooba Mufti as Chief Minister. Mehbooba Mufti as PDP President carries no weight. I might as well have written that invitation as working President of the National Conference. There's no difference.
Now, the critical question, of course, Omar Abdullah, is what should the talks be about? 2 days ago, speaking to this program, Sitaram Yechuri, and some 6 weeks ago, also speaking to this program, P. Chidambaram, both separately said that India must be willing to consider rolling back to the status quo of 1947 where and when that's deemed to be necessary. Do you think that must be made clear before the talks start? In other words, should greater autonomy be specifically on the agenda to make these talks meaningful?
Well, once you say that the talks will be within the four walls of the Constitution, then yes, nothing stops you from going right back to 1947. But when you give it a name, like if you were to call it greater autonomy, I can imagine that will make a lot of other mainstream political parties extremely uncomfortable. In the same vein, if you were to call it self-rule, it would make the National Conference uncomfortable. So don't give it a name. As long as you are willing to open a discussion on these lines, we have no problem with what you choose to call it right now.
Now, in an interview that he gave the Hindustan Times roughly 8 or 9 days ago, the BJP General Secretary, who is actually in charge of Jammu and Kashmir as well, Ram Madhav, made two very important points. First of all, he said the people of Kashmir had the right to ask for the moon. That was his phrase, ask for the moon. And secondly, when he was asked whether greater autonomy was possible, his answer was, let them ask, let the Indian Parliament decide, which to my mind was not ruling out the possibility at all. How much heart do you take from Ram Madhav's two specific comments?
None whatsoever, because unfortunately we've had these words in the past. I belong to a political party that received an assurance from no less a person than the elected Prime Minister of India that short of Azadi, the sky is the limit. I also belong to a political party and I am a member of an assembly that by more than 2/3 of a majority sent a resolution on these lines to the then government of India, which was summarily dismissed without discussion. Forget about Parliament. It wasn't even discussed in the Cabinet of India. So please forgive me if I am highly skeptical about being told that you can ask for the moon within the Constitution, or I'm told you can ask, let Parliament discuss. Because if experience tells us anything, A, short of Azadi or asking for the moon, the intent to engage with us is not there, and much less Parliament. Even in the Cabinet of India, there was no appetite, and I'm not sure there's an appetite even today to discuss these proposals. And that's what makes this process lose its legitimacy, because we get words, but we get no follow-up action on account of those words that have been bandied about.
In fact, for the benefit of the audience, I'll point out that the government of India that didn't even bother to discuss the autonomy resolution that your assembly passed in 2001-2002 was the government headed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the architect of the Insaniyat Kashmiriyat Jamhuriyat phrase. And therefore, if Mr. Vajpayee, who's the architect of that phrase that Mr. Modi today aspires to, dismissed your resolution without discussing it, it's hardly likely you're suggesting that Mr. Modi will be more keen to take a different approach to another resolution suggesting autonomy. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, yeah, correct, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. That resolution is still alive. It hasn't been trumped by any other resolution. It still stands on the record books of the Assembly. So if what Mr. Ram Madhav says is correct, I'll be quite happy to resubmit that resolution to the Government of India. Let's see if their intent and their words are followed by actual concrete action. But again, I come back to that point, the mechanism for this dialogue. Who's going to talk to the stakeholders? Because, I mean, let's face it, we've had interlocutors in the past. We've had Mr. K.C. Pant, we've had Governor Vohra, We've had the team of 3 interlocutors after 2010. Nothing became of them. So this time around, they're going to have to do something different, either an empowered group of parliamentarians or even a senior cabinet minister designated with this job of engaging the stakeholders in Jammu and Kashmir for some meaningful conclusion. If you're just going to give us another team of interlocutors and tell us they will talk to you, I'm sorry, but nobody's going to have any faith in the mechanism.
What would your preference be? A senior minister appointed specifically for the task, or a empowered group which is perhaps bigger than a single individual? Which would be your preference?
Look, as long as there is an ownership, as long as somebody owns the process, I don't mind. The advantage of having a parliamentary group is that Parliament as a whole will own that process. But, I mean, whatever comes has to come from the government. So, I'm quite happy to work with either of the two mechanisms, but we need something concrete and something with the entire weight and muscle of the government thrown behind it.
My last question, Omar Abdullah, what about talks with Pakistan? Is that a critical step at this point of time, or can that wait a while and be a follow-up after the internal situation has been effectively tackled?
Well, obviously, talks with Pakistan are also critical to what happens with Jammu and Kashmir, because whether we like it or not, post the Simla agreement, Pakistan has been attached to Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, whatever happens between India and Pakistan, Jammu and Kashmir is a part of that. And therefore, obviously, a dialogue with Pakistan touching upon all issues, including the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, will have to take place. Now, for that, the correct environment will have to be created in New Delhi and Islamabad, for which adequate steps will have to be taken. But I don't think either dialogue should be held hostage to the other. We shouldn't be saying that, look, because we're not talking to Pakistan, we can't have an internal dialogue, or vice versa. Because we're not having an internal dialogue, therefore dialogue with Pakistan can wait. Obviously, at some point in time, both dialogues will have to take place, but I don't believe that they have to take place simultaneously, immediately.
All right, Omar Abdullah, let's leave it there. My thanks to you for joining us and for explaining how you view today's developments, as well as explaining in particular what you think are the critical steps that need to be taken as far as a dialogue is concerned.